Thanks everybody for joining me on this presentation. Let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about how you can harness the power of modern analytics to evolve beyond basic KPIs that's really going to help you drive your brewery business performance. So here's the basic agenda we're going to follow. First, I'm going to give you a quick introduction on myself. Next, we're going to listen to a few stories about how breweries use data. Then we're going to get into the science. I know brewers like science, about how these modern analytics capabilities works. And then finally, some next steps if you'd like to try to implement some of them within your brewery. Okay, first up, introduction. So there I was, sitting in a conference room in Milwaukee in February, looking out the window and wondering if my California jacket was going to keep me alive. And while Milwaukee is a nice town, I really was not looking forward to being buried there. But once the demonstration I was there for started, it really captured all of my attention and subsequently has really transformed my career and become something that's a passion in my life. And that was a demonstration on Tableau, which is a modern analytics solution. Now, up to this point, I had already been involved in data and analytics at a large publicly traded company for several years. And I was really the guru in charge of taking all the data out of the different source systems that the business had. We were getting it all down into Excel, doing all sorts of different transformations and manipulations there, a very manual system, but then being able to pump out insights to different business leaders to drive the brewery. So while it was a relatively basic manual system, I was very proud of it, and it was used by across all of the business to drive business performance. But what really blew my mind was how these modern analytics capabilities can take all of that manual work and automate it and then make it so much more efficient and insightful than what we were able to do. So really went from that point in that demo to more recently leading a 600-person analytics community using Tableau in order to drive business performance. Okay, so what brings me here today? So like I said, I've seen how these work in large, successful companies. What I now want to be able to do is take some of these insights that I have and transfer them to the brewing industry. So I started Central Coast Analytics this year to help do that. And I won't talk too much about the business today. But what our basic business process is, we connect to all of your transactional source systems. Think of point of sale, financial, wholesale, marketing, really anywhere that you have some of your data. And we get all of that good raw data down into a singular spot. And from there, we enhance it and we transform it and make it very usable in these analytic systems. And then we display it in easy to use and insightful dashboards that you and your team can use to help drive your business performance by making data-driven decisions. So I'm currently working with several small breweries within California as we work to refine and perfect a lot of these systems. And then over the next several months, we'll certainly be working with more breweries to help push some of these modern analytics solutions out to the industry. Okay, so as you leave my presentation today, there's a few things that I want you to take away from you. So the first is that advanced analytics transforms raw data into quick, intelligent actions that significantly increase business performance and profitability. And we'll give some more demonstration on how that actually works in subsequent slides. And another takeaway is going to be that information is good. And I think the brewing industry today tracks a lot of information and data. They probably look at it in the different transactional systems they use. They might be taking a lot of information into Excel, but sometimes they don't really know how to use it to drive business performance. So while information is good, actionable insights are gold. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is how to get some of that raw data into some really smart actions that you can take to drive your business performance. Okay, so that's enough on the introduction. What we're going to do next is I'm going to try to talk you through the why this is important, and then we'll get into the kind of the how it works. Okay, here we go. We're going to do story time next. Okay, so there once was two breweries. We're going to look at how these different breweries use data a little bit differently to try to achieve business results. So we're going to look at ABC and XYZ Brewery. And if you really like these logos, I could do a side job for you and maybe retransform your brewery logo. Don't worry too much about the specifics of how these breweries did business. Let's just kind of consider them equivalent, right? So they both had similar revenue and cost structure. So let's just say, for sake of argument here in our story, they brewed about 5,000 barrels per year. They both had 2 locations, one that served food, and they had both a mixture of wholesale and on-premises sales. And both of them, because a lot of the good work from CBP and then some other organizations throughout the industry over the last several years, they've seen how tracking data is important in order to drive your business. So let's say they tracked data in several different ways. Maybe one, they tracked financial data, so you can kind of see what that looks like here. Then maybe they tracked production volumes. And then finally, let's say they tracked hours. So a lot of good data here. However, this is kind of where they were stuck at that point in time. So yeah, a lot of it is just data tables within Excel. Let's say they were relatively hard to update, and then we'll see how they were able to make decisions off of them in a minute. Okay, so both of these breweries, as they're tracking this data, they didn't really like the trend they were seeing, and this might hit close to home in today's brewing industry. So for one, they were seeing lower sales over time, and maybe it wasn't a really steep downward drop, but things weren't growing like they were several years ago. So they were both cognizant that their revenue has been lower recently. And then on the unfortunate side of things, and this is probably true across the board in the brewing industry over the last year or so, is costs have really skyrocketed. So you don't have to be a business expert to do the basic math of lower sales plus higher costs. That's not a good thing, right? So not a situation they want to be in. So they both saw these trends, so they wanted to take action. So let's go ahead and see how they did that. They're going to do that in 2 different ways. First, we're going to look at brewery ABC. And because of how their system was set up, they had a basic and rigid use of the data that was available to them. And then once we look at ABC, we're going to switch over to XYZ, and we're going to see how they utilized modern analytics to try to solve some of these business problems. Okay, so first up is ABC. And like I mentioned, they kind of struggled using available data for a few reasons. One is their system was pretty complex. They had data spread across a lot of systems, and they didn't have anybody on their team who was really good at data. And I mean, that makes perfect sense, right? You guys are hiring people who are good at selling good beer to your customers. You're not hiring people who are data experts. But that kind of left them in this rigid system where they were able to get to some data. Sometimes it was at too high of level, other times it was at too low of level. And it was difficult for them to really use to make smart decisions quickly. So first up, they said, okay, we need to cut our expenses. So they went in and they looked at some of their financial information. They looked at some of their hours info, and they recognized, rightfully so, that the payroll is a really large part of their cost structure, right? So they basically said, payroll is our highest expense category. And because they didn't have any other data to get more precise in their decision-making, they just made a blanket statement of, we're going to cut hours 10% across the board in order to lower our payroll expense. Okay, on the other side of things, they needed to increase revenue. So again, they go back to some of their financial information. But like we saw with the cost one, is they were kind of stuck in this level of detail that wasn't right to make really smart decisions. So what they were able to find, though, was that one of their tap rooms, the revenue wasn't as expected. So what they said is, we need to raise revenue. Let's go do that by raising our draft prices by $1. And we're going to see in a second that those results that they received weren't exactly what they were hoping for. So this is where we left them, right? We saw a gap between costs and sales. So they started to implement some of these changes based on the data that they were tracking. And we can see, I guess, on the good side, their costs were reduced a little bit. So as they were cutting those hours, they did see their costs reduce. However, as you might be able to imagine, as they did a really broad brush approach at cutting these hours, in some cases, maybe on the weekends when they had higher demand, they were cutting those hours out also. So really, they were providing worse service levels to their customers. And at the same time, they were trying to pass along this price increase, right? So not a good position for their consumers. Worse service levels in their tap room, higher costs. So, right, people are probably going to go away. And that's what we ended up seeing. And they kind of got in this position where their revenue kept dropping and dropping, and they had to keep cutting costs too in order to stay somewhat profitable. And that's not a good position to be in, right? That's not a fun business position. It's like chasing sales lower and lower. So they started off trying to do the right thing. So they tried to use some data, but they were not able to get to those quick and precise insights quick enough. And the actions they took really led them to a disaster. Okay, so let's look at the main takeaways from this story. So first of all, like I've mentioned, they didn't have the right level of analysis to take these smart and precise actions. Also, because their data system was rigid and inflexible, they didn't have the time or the skill set to really enhance it. So they were stuck with the data they had. Even though they knew it wasn't perfect, they had to use it to take actions. And that's why some of the actions they took were not optimal. And then finally, they took these actions, but then they didn't have a quick way to monitor how successful those were doing. So they weren't really able to see in the short run how they were impacting their business. But by the time they did pick up on it, let's say they did another financial review, 3 or 6 months down the road, by then it was too late. A lot of the damage had already been done. And as you guys know, if you lose a bunch of customers, it's hard and costly in a lot of cases to bring them back in. Okay, so that's how brewery ABC used their rigid and inflexible system to try to solve some of these business models. Sorry, some of these business conditions. So let's see how XYZ did it differently. So now that we get to XYZ, we're going to see somebody using more of a modern analytics approach to solve some of these business problems. So XYZ in this case used these modern analytics solutions, and we'll get into some more detail on these in a second. I'm going to flash up a few dashboards here, but don't panic. Keep calm. I'm going to show you some data and analytics here that might be a little advanced compared to what you're used to seeing today. But I'm going to walk you through them step by step. So you're going to see that once you kind of understand what's going on, all of this stuff is super approachable, right? A lot of it's just common sense and trying to bring these insights to the forefront so you're able to make some of these better business decisions. Okay, something I want to spend a minute on before we get into those details about how modern analytics really allows a lot of this stuff to be effortless. So you're about to see some analysis that you would think based on your past experience, oh man, that would take us forever to put together, or I don't even know how we would get or combine data out of our payroll system with data out of our revenue system. But don't worry about any of that. That's really where the power of these modern analytic solutions come into play. Let me walk you through the basic steps, but we're not going to do a full demo at this point. So first of all, we extract data out of your source systems. We get all of that data down into a single spot. And what we do with it there is we really enhance it for analytics. So this might be combining data from 2 different systems together, or maybe coming up with some custom formulas that would be difficult to build out in Excel. We really enhance that data for insights. And then finally, we display all of that in easy to use dashboards that you and your team can then use for that quick data-driven decision making. Basically, all of this stuff is at your fingertips, and it doesn't take any effort from your team to update it on a daily basis or to build it initially. Okay, cool. Let's look at some of those details for XYZ company. So they started by taking a similar approach to ABC. So first up, we want to reduce costs. How are we going to go ahead and do that? And they had looked at some of their data that they had available at a lot of different levels of their business. And they found that their bartender hours, in this case, had been increasing by quite a bit. So they've already pinpointed in one area of the business, right? Maybe the production area is doing fine, the kitchen part's doing fine, some of their admin is doing okay. They've already pinpointed that some of the hours they're seeing increased are from their bartenders. So that's where they're going to dive in to start here. And they're going to see throughout this period that they've been looking at, hours have been up by 35%. Okay, how does that relate to sales? So they also outlined their sales, taproom sales during this time period, and they saw that's only up 8%. So that's probably not ideal, right? Hours and costs are up a lot, revenue's up a little bit. So not really the position we want to be in. Let's see how they then transform that even into being even more actionable. So first step is they just basically combined it on one graph so we can see how both trend over time compared to each other. Okay, this is somewhat interesting, but what if we created a ratio and we divided the sales we earned, or the revenue, divided by the hours we worked? I think that's going to give us a little better insight into what some of these trends are. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now we can really see some good information, right? So we saw at the beginning of this period, we were making about $100 in sales for every hour that was worked. And by the end of this period, it was down to $80. So that's down 20%. So definitely an area that we should focus on, right? We've already proven that we're 20% less efficient in the use of our hours in this part of our business. Okay, well, let's try to dial that in further. So let's go to the next step. As you guys know, demand can vary quite a bit by day of the week. So we're going to look at the next visual here, and you'll notice across the top, we're listing each day of the week. So Monday through Sunday, right? And then on the vertical axis, we're looking at that tasting room sales per hour ratio that we talked about. So we want this number to always be higher, right? So we want to make more money for every hour that we worked. So you can see I already have the first data point plotted on here. So this is showing that first Monday, our ratio was about $40 per hour. Then let's look at that next Monday. Oh, cool, it went up a little bit. We're up to maybe $42 per hour. Let's just fill out the rest of the Mondays on here, and then I'm going to go out and fill out the rest of the week. So your eyes are probably already able to draw some insights from here, but let's use some other analytics techniques to really get it more dialed in. So first off, I'm just going to throw an average out there, right? So each day might bounce around a little bit, and it's going to be tough for you to really get it dialed in for a specific day of demand. You don't always know who's walking in the door on any given day, but we can kind of make some assumptions based on averages. So we went ahead and did that here. And I want to remind everybody that in this ratio we're looking at, we're really looking to drive that revenue per hour higher. So based on that, you can probably pick out what some of the good days are. So I'll just highlight those. We have Monday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So Monday is kind of interesting. You might imagine or have already assumed that they must have some sort of special event on Monday in order for it to be about as profitable as the weekend is. And in this case, that's a true story. They end up running trivia at this brewery on Mondays. Okay, on the bad side, we have Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So those are much lower. We're only getting about $25 or $30 of sales per hour worked on average those 2 days. And then we find Thursday that's kind of in the middle. Okay, so now we're starting to keep pinpointing, right? We got the microscope out, we're getting this thing dialed in. So now we've kind of decided Tuesday, Wednesday, and maybe Thursday are some areas we should focus, but probably don't need to worry as much about the weekend or Mondays. Okay, so let's take it to the next level of analysis. So now we're going to look at just revenue for each hour of the day for every day of the week. And let's pick out what's our more busier times of the day and of the week and what's less busy. So first, just kind of building this visual out so you see what's going on. Monday at 11 a.m., that's when we open up to start the week. Normally, we're making about $100 per hour of revenue. You can see how Tuesdays and Wednesdays shake out. So Tuesday is pretty similar. Wednesday, we make a little bit more money. And then I'm going to go ahead and just release the rest of this. And you can see I've highlighted the lower revenue hours of the week. So what we're going to do now is we kind of have a shape there, right? We see during the week, early in the day, and then especially on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, we have more opportunity to work less hours because the revenue from our customers is lower. We're not going to be focusing more on like weekend afternoons when our revenue is really high. We don't want to cut hours there. In fact, we might need to add hours to those time periods to make our customers having a good experience. Okay, so based on some of these insights, let's see what some of the actions they took were. So first of all, we're going to say during the week, we want to reduce or open later in the day. So they're going to start to open at 12 instead of 11. So just right there with how many people they had working, we're going to say that's going to save about 20 hours per week. And then we're going to do some further reductions on Tuesday and Wednesday in the afternoons. So by doing that, we're going to be able to reduce hours by another 25% on those 2 days. So that's saving another 22 hours per week. So you might look at that and say, well, 42 hours a week, that's nice, but in the whole grand scheme of things, that's not a ton of money. And I agree. If we waited too late to take these actions, if we kind of waited until we were in an emergency situation, this might not be enough money to really dig you out of the hole, right? But what the benefits of these modern analytic solutions is you catch these things much earlier in the process than you would otherwise by running a very manual process. So let's just say they were able to implement these changes a whole year ago, maybe when they first noticed this. By this point in time, they already would have saved over 2,200 hours. And now that does start to become a pretty sizable financial amount, right? When we're able to get up to that level. Okay, cool. So that's kind of how they tackled their expense. Let's look a little bit more at how they tackled their revenue side of things. So if we're talking about revenue in a tap room, we're going to stay on the tap room here. You can do a few different things. Maybe you can do more, but I think it basically breaks down into three categories. I have one showing there. You can bring more people into your building. Okay, that's great. Next, when they're in there, you can charge them more for what they're already going to buy. Okay, so we could do that also, right? We can raise prices across the board on all of our items. And then finally, and this is the one we're going to look at a little bit more, is you can have them buy more stuff once they're in your building. And we're going to see how modern analytics can help your team sell more things to a customer when they're in your tap room. Okay, so let's check out some of the analysis that this brewery did in order to be able to be successful and do that. So first of all, they categorized each of their tabs into what was on that tab. So we're going to start with the simple ones. So these only had like one type of item on the tab. So did they buy drinks only? Was it cans only, food only, or merchandise only, right? So we can see drinks only are definitely the highest volume in this area. Next up, we're going to then look at all of these multi-categories. So this is they bought more than one type of thing. So the number one on this list is they bought drinks and food. At the very bottom, you can see they bought drinks, food, merchandise, and cans. And you can see how the volume broke down there. And then if we were just going to combine all these together, we can really see what it looks like. Okay, so that kind of gives us an idea of what our customers are currently buying. Let's look a little bit more about how much revenue do we make based off of each of those. So I removed some of the very small volume ones on here, so you can see kind of the top 10 listed there on the left-hand side. And let's look a little bit for this brewery at what their average tab dollars were. So when it was drinks only on a tab, they made about $25 of revenue off of those. And then you can see how that works down. We take that average tab price, right? We multiply it by the number of tabs and we have total revenue earned. Let's look at the other side of the equation. So what do we make the most money off of? And in this case, it's when a customer buys drinks, food, and merchandise. So that's about $115 per tab. So right away, we know this brewery must be in California, right? But we can see that they sold about 218 tabs in this case. So even though they make a lot of money for each one of these tabs, they don't have really high volume. So this was about $25,000 of sales. Okay, so let's just show all the other categories on the screen. So something that should stand out is that drinks and food. So we see this as the second highest volume tab, and they make about $65 per tab there. Sorry. Okay, so that's some interesting information. Let's go a little bit further and we'll do some aggregations here. And all we're going to do is combine all of those multi-category ones and the single category ones. So what are some insights here? And I think the main one that should stand out are we make about $40 per more per tab of revenue when we sell a multi-category tab versus when somebody just comes in and buys beers or just buys food. So it's, as we're going to see as we go through here, we really start to earn more and more money since we already have the customer in the building. Let's try to sell them more stuff while they're here. Okay, so how can we do that? It's one thing just to tell your staff, okay, go upsell everything and try to sell all these multi-category combinations. That's a little hard to do if you don't really provide them any information or insights on what might be most successful. So for this brewery, what we basically did is we said, let's look at all of your historical transactions. And we want to start to see what, without us really pushing it, what our customers already buying in combination on their own. I won't show every possible type that we were able to come up with, but just a few so you get the basic idea here. So this first one is if they bought a draft beer, what food were they likely to purchase. So in this case, if they bought one of the fruit IPAs that this brewery sells, they were most likely to order that Chipotle chicken sandwich, and they did that 15% of the time. On another one, we found that customers who bought the stout, they were most likely, if they were going to buy merchandise, they were going to buy the hoodie. And then finally, in this case, for customers that bought the West Coast IPAC, if they bought a draft of that, they were most likely to take cans home with them 10% of the time. So, okay, now by giving our staff some of this information, they're able to really incentivize or encourage customers on some of these combinations that they already know are popular to really incentivize others to take their single category tab if they were just going to buy beers and try to get them to get some of these other things too, because they have these additional insights now. So with all this information, they're going to challenge their team to upsell. And then ideally, they're going to reward them accordingly when the team is successful by doing some of these upsells. So let's look at what their average tab price was before. So they were making about $40 per tab in this case on average. So they explain to their team what's going on, right? Let's show them some numbers. It's going to be pretty straightforward when we show it to them why we're trying to push this information. And what they did was they set a goal of 10% of the time. We want to try to transform some of those single category sales into multi-category. So that sounds reasonable, right? It's not like we want to do 50% of them or 75%. We're really just looking for 10%. So set a goal that's kind of reasonable. And then let's explain why we want to do this. So if we did that, it would be about 660 tabs, a $40 increase. So we're talking about $26,000 over the period of time they're looking at. That's a decent amount of money. And then let's say the brewery put this in place, and let's just kind of see over time, their average tab price starts to go up. So great. Share those results with your team too. They're successful. You know, they're meeting these challenges that we set for them. So let's reward them for being able to do that and post this information out there so they can really see how well this performance is going. Okay, so the moral of the story with XYZ Brewery. So they quickly acknowledged some of these issues, right? They were able to precisely pinpoint the problem. And I think that and having all the information you need to really smartly implement a specific action. So I think these two are key. So getting to where you're able to really pinpoint the problem. Probably you don't have a problem across all of your whole brewery operations, right? There's probably these pockets that you need to be able to surface. And I think that's what modern analytics does so good at doing. So you can take that really precise and specific action. And then we didn't talk too much about it in this instance, but also this brewery monitored the actions they took. So they put these checks in place. So let's say they did reduce some of those hours. So over the next few weeks, they watched it really close and tried to make sure that they were getting the benefits of the reduced hours with not getting some of the negatives of potentially impacting their customer experience and reducing revenue. And then when you're monitoring these things, you're able to easily adjust course. So I think when you have a modern analytics solution in place, you might be more willing to take some of these risks and actually make changes because you know if something doesn't go right, you're going to catch it right away and you're going to implement a change to get it on the right track, right? So you don't need to be afraid of trying to make decisions or taking new actions or experimenting and trying new things. Because again, if it doesn't go right, you're going to catch it right away and be able to easily adjust course. So a lot of these things are complicated to do with a manual data system. It's hard to get all these different data points you need and get to these precise actions like we talked about, but it's simple when working with modern analytics. And we're going to show some more of that in a minute. So going back to this brewery, and here's a quote from them. Although we found ourselves in a difficult spot, we were able to rely on our analytic systems to help lead us to the best actions. Crisis averted. Okay, so to kind of sum up this section, and I won't spend too much time here because we've already hit on a lot of it, but the difference between the approach of the two breweries. First, we looked at ABC Brewery, and they had a really manual kind of rudimentary data system. So it was good they were looking at some data, but because they were using a homegrown system, they really weren't able to get to the level of detail on the insights that they needed to be able to take those targeted approaches to fixing parts of their business. When we look at XYZ company, though, we saw they had a fully automated modern analytics system. So really, all of this really good level of detail and insights that they were able to pinpoint these targets in their business was all right there at their fingertips. So they had a really nice system in place. And modern analytics provides immense value to breweries when you really move from that more homegrown data system that we saw in ABC to those modern analytics capabilities. I think you can see how this would certainly help out your brewery business team. And then finally, before we move to the next section, I want to define modern analytics. I've said the term a lot. You've probably picked up on what it is, but let me give you what I consider my full definition. So modern analytics is a system-based process that consumes large amounts of data from different sources. It enhances it for analytics, and it displays it using data visualizations that let you explore and gain insights at different levels of analysis for decision-making. Okay. So now that you've kind of seen why this stuff is important, let's walk through a little bit of how it works and some of the other benefits you get from a modern analytics system. So I get this question, at least from my wife frequently. What's the big deal about charts and graphs anyway? So give me a minute. I'm going to explain why data visualization, though that's really taking raw data and putting it in a visual format, is so important in the role of modern analytics. So first, we're going to start with kind of a fun exercise. I'm going to display a grid and give you 10 seconds, and you're going to count how many pale are listed on this grid. Ready, go. Okay, time's up. That was probably pretty hard to do, right? And even if you came up with a number, I'm guessing you're not all that confident in it. So this would be a demonstration of just a very raw data table. So hard to pick up a lot of insights directly from this. Let's use some data visualization principles, and you'll see how some of those really impact how quick you're able to pick up on some insights. So first of all, it's going to be real basic. We're going to add some color to this data table to highlight our pale. So I'm not even going to have to give you 10 seconds this time. You're going to be able to count these up in just a few seconds. You're going to see that we have 12 pale listed here. And so color really makes those stand out, right? Let's look at a few more things that we can do to help enhance this. If we then sorted it from the most to the least, we can get a few more insights. Number one, we can see that West Coast IPA is our highest demand beer, and we see that brown is down at the bottom, so the lowest demand. And we see pale is somewhat towards the front, right? So while we get a few more insights, it's still hard to be very precise. So now let's start to get this into some more data visualization formats. This would be a basic bar graph, right? So we're not really doing anything too advanced here, but with this format, you're able to see the volume of each of these beers pretty precisely. We can find pale in our list, and quickly we can see that we had 12 pales in that grid. Let's just sort this a little bit different. So now we're going largest to smallest, and we can pick up some more insights and see West Coast IPAs are top with 14 and brown is the bottom with 6. So again, really easy to pick up some insights here. And then if we went even more advanced, we could highlight pale so we really see what we're looking at. We can see that ranks third amongst all the beers, and there's 12 that were sold for pale. Okay, now we're going to bring it into what I would consider more of a modern analytics dashboard. And we're going to be able to get some additional insights. So I'm going to display this. I'm not going to go through all the detail on here, but this is basically made up of that 10 by 10 grid we saw. And as you just kind of scan through here with your eyes, you can see all the different insights that you're able to pick up really quickly as compared to if you were back on that grid trying to pick up some of these things on your own. I'm just going to click through what, if we changed a filter on here, what some different beers would look like. So you can see, here's what blonde would look like. Let's do one more. Let's go to West Coast IPA. So you can see that, how that one looks also. So pretty powerful, right? Bringing it into this format. Okay, and why does this work? So we're going to get a little bit sciencey here. So this is something called pre-attentive attributes, or I like to think of it kind of how we avoided being eaten by lions and bears. So as humans evolved, our brains, so we didn't get eaten, are really quick to pick up on certain patterns. And that kept us alive or helped keep us, to solve puzzles or anything else we needed to do to survive. And why that's important is we can use some of those in data visualization to help your brain really quickly pick up on some of these insights as compared to having to put conscious thought into it. Let's see what some of those are. So the first is length. So like with this matches what we saw in a bar graph format, right? It's really easy for the human eye to pick up on something that's longer than something else. Also, color is really obvious. We saw this at the very beginning. When we add that change in color to something, it's really quick for us subconsciously to pick up on that without even really having to think about it. And then you can see what some of these other pre-attentive attributes are here. And that's really what makes these modern analytic solutions so powerful, is we're able to move from this raw data like we saw in the data table and use data visualization techniques to get to these really quick insights. And in a lot of cases, using our subconscious to pick up on these things versus having to consciously think about it. Okay, I want to talk through real quick some other modern analytics benefits. I'm not going to spend too much time here. First of all, because this stuff is automated, it's really efficient to run. The data you're looking at is always fresh and it's available when you need it. Another thing we get to is because humans aren't involved in all the data management, this is really accurate. The data is always accurate and your team can always trust it. Whereas right now, maybe they don't trust the data and they always have to compare it to another source to know if it's a good source of truth or not. Another thing we're looking at is these modern analytics techniques allow us to get really highly functional, high quality analysis at whatever level of detail you need. And it's also extremely organized. And then finally, and you may have run into this before, let's say you have a person who's really good at data in your brewery and they've set up a lot of things for you, but they're kind of the only one that can do this. What if they leave your company? You're in a lot of trouble there. So the nice thing about having systems prepare all this stuff for us is those systems will always run. It's not reliant on a single person in your brewery. And then finally, the scalability, I think, is also really important. As you start to get more and more data in there, spreadsheets really start to bog down. Or let's say you bought another brewery, that'd be pretty cool, right? And you want to feed in their data into yours so you can really get a holistic view of your business. That's going to be pretty tough to do in a homegrown analytics system, but really easy to do in modern analytics. Okay, I'm going to flip through the next slides pretty quick. I just want to give you a few more feels of what it looks like going from a raw data table for some stuff that you're probably tracking today, maybe in Excel, to a modern analytics dashboard. First one we're going to look at, let's say you wanted to do a good inventory dashboard. So we're moving from that raw data to some good data visualizations. It works really good for production volumes. We'll see what that looks like here. Operations expenses. So these they're super important for you guys to watch, right? But it can be really hard using a spreadsheet to figure out what you should be focused on. You bring that into a data visualization and everything stands out as what's going good, what's going bad, what needs your focus. In this case, we're looking at an email marketing campaign. So we bring certain insights there. And then finally here, we're going to look at an employee survey. All of this data is really good data, right? But it's hard to take actions off of. But we get it into a dashboard like this. We right away see where we should be focusing our attention. Okay, so finally, we're going to move to next steps. So let's say you've looked at some of this and you're kind of interested in, well, maybe we would get some good benefits if we introduced a system like this in our brewery. What are some next steps to get you started? And I could probably talk for 2 hours on this topic. I'm going to do it really quick. So this is going to be a brief overview. First of all, I hope you've seen that modern analytics really brings all of this together. And we're moving from information, which is good, but what we're really trying to do is get to those actionable insights, and that's what's gold. And that's really what allows your brewery to have a competitive advantage if you're able to get to all of these really good actionable insights that you can drive profitability and performance in your brewery. And the cool thing about this is, where maybe 20 years ago, this was not available to all. You had to have a team of data engineers that would help with this. You had to maybe invest a lot of money into a platform. But today, especially using these new cloud-based solutions, this is available to all, no matter how big or small you are, or how simple or complex your business is. This is going to fit you. I showed everything today using Tableau, and I've used Tableau for 10 years. I love it. It's a real passion of mine, but it's not the only thing out there in the industry, right? So while I highly recommend it, I'll show you some other competitors also that you can look for. So this is Power BI logo. This is Microsoft solution, also an industry leader when it comes to data visualization platforms. But there's definitely others out there too. So depending on what investment level you have, maybe some of your team skill set, exactly what capabilities you're looking for, there's going to be something out here that's going to fit for your team if you want to move on to a modern analytics solution. Okay, we're going to quickly go through what some of the main steps to implement are. And you'll see on the middle of the screen, I have a diagram that we use for some other stuff. So I'm going to highlight certain parts of that as we walk through here. The first step is we need to kind of design the system, right? So we need to understand your current state. What data do you currently use? What's important to you? What are some of your priorities? So we want to gather those requirements, and we need to understand all of your current systems that house data and how we can get data out of those systems. And then once we have that blueprint, we're going to develop our different solutions. So we're going to set up our data extraction process. We're going to transform that data and make it into those really good insights. And then finally, we're going to develop our Tableau content that's out there for you to get up these data visualizations and pick up what you need from those. And then finally, we're going to deploy it all. And this is really where we start to push it out to your brewery team. So we're going to set up the Tableau system, get different licenses going. We're going to test and validate it all so you guys are sure you can trust it. We're going to train your team on that and set up different communication systems. And then finally, set up a system to maintain your solution. So while there are several steps here, and if you're doing it all on your own, it's going to be a little bit complicated and be a big project, but none of this is rocket science, right? It's all pretty straightforward. Your team can implement this as needed. And next, we're going to talk through how either your team can do it on their own, or you can partner with somebody like me that would help you through this process. So we're going to walk through like the two extremes. So one is going to be you do it all internally, or you fully outsource it. And I'm going to walk through some of the pros and cons of each. A lot of this could probably be argued, depending on the specifics of a certain situation. I'm going to give you kind of a generic pro and con for each. So on the internal side, you obviously have full control over it, right? You can move at your own pace. And especially for the initial investment, it might be a little bit less. I'd probably argue that over the lifespan of this project, you might end up spending more, but initially it could be a smaller investment. Now, some of the cons here are it's going to be really time consuming to put it together if your team's trying to do it on their own and if you don't have somebody who's already an expert in this stuff. So you're going to need that skill set on your team to be successful. Because the worst case is going to be you spend a lot of your team's time, you invest some money into building something, and it doesn't work, right? And it just falls flat. That's worst case scenario. And that is a risk if you try to do it all internally, if you're not able to resource it with people or time or money. If you're able to fully outsource it, you get some benefits of it being a really quick implementation. Some of these can be implemented within a few days or even a week's worth of time. You're able to get insights that quickly. It's going to be pretty seamless, and you're going to get world-class content. Depends who you work with, but in a lot of cases, you're going to get world-class content when you outsource some of this. Some of the cons here, though, might be you have a little bit less direct control, especially in the short term. So all of this stuff is customizable, but in order to customize it, it's going to take a little bit more time and probably a little bit more money, right? If you're working with a consultant, and you might have a little bit more upfront investment when you're working with an outside partner. So one thing I would argue is a good approach is maybe do some of it internally. And maybe you don't do all of it internally at the beginning, but your team starts to take over more ownership and responsibility of it over time, because you'll probably have some people who are really interested in this stuff once they kind of get their foot in the door and know what's going on. But then you also use some outside consultant work, maybe to set up some of the initial stuff that your team could then take over within the future. So I think this is a good mix of using some of your own internal resources and using a data and analytics guide to really help you through the process. Okay, so as we wrap this up, I really want to challenge your team. Hopefully you saw some of the benefits of these modern analytics solutions. Take charge of your data, right? Use it as a competitive advantage for your brewery. If others in your market aren't doing stuff like this, just think how far ahead of them you're going to be when it comes to decision making, how quick you're going to be able to pick up on opportunities, or how soon you can identify risks and work to mitigate them. So I'd love to work with your team, or even just have a chat about this stuff. Hopefully you picked up, I'm really passionate on these topics. So even if we don't work directly together, but you'd like to do, a 30-minute brainstorming session, or just trade some ideas, I'd love to talk to you about any of that. Here's some of my contact information if you want to get a hold of me. And then finally, if you want to scan here, this is going to take you to a little more demo of what it actually looks like as like a day in the life. If you have a modern analytics solution, what would it look like to your team if you were logging in? And from here, you can also access my website, which is going to have some other good content for you and then some free resources. So thanks a lot for your time today. I hope that was interesting for you. And here's to brewing with precision and passion, all powered by data and analytics. Cheers.